Hello. Syria's President Assad has delivered his first major speech since June. In a TV address, he denounced his opponents as puppets of the West and called for Syrian people to stand up and fight those who threaten the country's future. The US State Department has dismissed the speech as another attempt by the regime to cling on to power. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen reports.
60,000 Syrian dead, according to the UN. Hundreds of thousands more wounded. Millions driven from their homes. But the end of Syria's civil war is nowhere close. President Assad is embattled. This was his first public speech in 6 months to a carefully vetted audience of supporters in the Damascus Opera House. But predictions of his regime's imminent collapse have all been wrong. One reason: he has important foreign friends.
We thank all these countries at the forefront: Russia, China and Iran, and all the countries that have stood with Syria against interference in our affairs. We salute and we are grateful for the stances of these countries.
The president delighted his supporters. He called for dialogue and a referendum on the future. But rebels he called traitors could, he said, have no part in it. He told them that terrorists who've embraced al-Qaeda and jihadists from around the world were trying to destroy Syria. Syrian refugees in Jordan watched the speech. The shoes were waved as signs of contempt. He's calling for a political solution, this man said. Assad needs to stop the airstrikes, the shelling of the civilians and the killing. The people won't accept this speech. What seem to be pictures of protests are appearing on the web. The only thing the regime's enemies in Syria and abroad want to hear in an Assad speech is his resignation, Britain included.
It's a very disappointing speech. It's hypocritical because it suggests no part of the regime in the death and destruction that's been waged against the Syrian people. It suggests it's all been done from outside, when it's the Syrian people that have taken against their own regime.
And outside President Assad's security bubble, Syria's war goes on. There are no good scenarios in Syria right now, and there haven't been for a while. A UN peace envoy is struggling to make progress, partly because so much blood is being spilt and the parties are so bitterly opposed to each other, and partly because the UN Security Council is divided and deadlocked about what to do next. President Assad's supporters tried to kiss him. His enemies want him dead. No wonder the diplomats are struggling. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Well, with me here in the studio is Ammar Waqqaf of the Syrian Social Club. Now, that's an organisation formed by a group of Syrians living here in the UK in support of the government and advocating regime reform. Ammar Waqqaf, thank you very much. I mean, what was achieved by President Assad coming out after all this time and making this appearance?
I think what happened today was an announcement by the government, done by the top official, in a sense, of a long process that has taken place, in my opinion, for the past few months. It's a sort of negotiation between the government and a part of the opposition that was mediated by the Russians. In a sense, the liberal left-wing side of the opposition. Apparently, they've reached a certain decision to work together in a new phase in Syria, and apparently they will form a sort of unity government that takes into consideration this faction of the opposition and leave aside the faction that doesn't want dialogue, as they have announced, or the faction that has actually carried weapons against the government.
What is being interpreted across the world in many places by many people is that this was, as it's being criticised, delusional to talk about this unity government, this reform process. This is just something that does not exist, that does not feature in the landscape of Syria after so many deaths, after so many months of bloodshed.
Well, let me tell you, if I may, how an ordinary Syrian who has supported the government for all sorts of reasons, whether they like President Assad, whether they hate President Assad, but dislike more the alternative, and who went to their jobs on a daily basis and so on, how they think about it. It is hard for us as Syrians to accept that any group of Syrians, who, no matter what the link between them is, that they would carry weapons against the government, against the state, have backing from outside, whether Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and so on, to achieve something. So it seems that the minds of certain Syrians is set now to accept a wider government that takes into consideration certain progressive elements rather than religious elements. If you take into consideration that Syria has quite a few revolutions that are taking place at the same time, one of which obviously is the democracy one, but that's only a narrow thing. The major one actually is trying to shift Syria from a secular state into a religious state, and against that a lot of Syrians are fighting.
We have not got much time, but I mean, this is what we are hearing from this message is that President Assad is describing those who are against him as either foreign terrorists or puppets of the West. I mean, this dialogue does not feature any idea of reconciliation. I mean, to talk of reform of the regime, that just does not figure, surely, in Syria right now. I mean, looking at it from where you are, as you say, as a Syrian from outside, do you have any faith that this can end any other way than, as Waqqaf Brahimi has warned, a descent into hell?
I would say that as a Syrian, I wouldn't want my government to be targeting or having any dialogue with someone who's actually appointed by the West. If I'm going to be Syrian, even if the coalition is respected and acknowledged by a lot of external parties, they are yet to convince the Syrian people of their credibility, and there are yet to be a lot of Syrians who take them as a credible representative. These are people that are largely viewed by Syrians, especially those who support the central or who do not want the collapse of the central government, as people who were appointed by the outside. And those people, in the political sense, are just employees.
But there are tens of thousands of Syrians out there, as you know, who would say, this is what we want as well. Of course there are those who don't want that, but what about their voice?
I can tell you that this sort of coalition that has been branded on the top of the made redundant National Council, this sort of coalition doesn't have a large base on the ground. Those who have a large base on the ground, hundreds of thousands, even millions probably of Syrians, are those who are talking the religious sort of narrative, the Salafi sort of narrative, those who are funded and armed by the outside opposition. But this coalition is more of a PR talk to appease the West or the public opinion in the West, rather than having any real grounds on the ground. They talk about freedom, democracy, and so on, which is fine. But that just tells you that whilst a lot of Syrians are carrying arms against the government for reasons for sectarian reasons, rather than for democracy reasons, it just tells you that they don't have much representation on the ground.
The point I asked you about, and I must get your answer very briefly, if you will, is can this end any other way? I mean, to talk about regime, really, regime reform now, and I know your organisation supports reform of the regime, supports President Assad. Where does that figure? Because this is not going in that direction. President Assad has talked these words, these are empty words surely, for nearly 2 years now. Nothing changes.
What he pointed out was that he never found a credible partner that is capable, A, and willing, B. Capable meaning has the right representation, and willing is willing through dialogue. We have to understand that the coalition that was recognized by the international...
There is an internationally supported plan. There is a UN envoy, Waqqaf Brahimi. There is a plan in place. The UN ambassador to the UN, the US ambassador to the UN said there is a framework. There's a framework. Why is President Assad saying there is nobody to engage with that he can find to form this peace? Surely that is just disingenuous of President Assad to say this.
The Syrian government cannot afford to lose its supporter base. If they engage with people who are deemed by their supporter base to be people who have carried out the weapons, there is a hugely important principle here. If Syrians allow a group of people, a group of Syrians, to carry weapons against the state, that would be setting a precedent. And nothing will prevent another group of people, say a minority of some sort, to gain recognition by whatever international community they want to go to in the future and carry weapons against the state.
And so the cycle of bloodshed continues?
I think it will continue for a while, because I don't think... The Russians and the Americans met in Geneva about a month ago, and I believe the Russians told the Americans what they were doing. And I don't think the Americans actually accepted this. So they've, recognized the coalition.
Ammar Waqqaf, I'm afraid we really have to leave it. Thank you very much indeed. Ammar Waqqaf of the Syrian Social Club here in London.